Hey, good morning, guys. Today we're at the beach. I'm going to be photographing shorebirds, and I'm going to tell you all about my shoot process when I'm out in the field. Let's get wild. People of Earth, welcome back to Remain Wild. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome. My name is Rick Evans. I'm a wildlife photographer, and today I'm going to be going over the shoot process that I have when I go out in the field to photograph wildlife. I'm going to have 5 tips for you that'll make sure that you are able to step up the quality of your photos next time you're out in the field. So let's get started. So tip number 1, it's all about light. Light is literally what makes photography, right? So light enters the lens, it hits your sensor, and that's what creates the image for you to take home. So you really need to pay attention to the quality and direction of light when you're out in the field. So the best times for wildlife photography are actually near dawn and near dusk. The reason for that is, number 1, the light is gonna be much lower in the sky and it's gonna be a little bit softer than the harsh midday sun from overhead, okay? So you're basically gonna have a better quality of light near dawn and dusk, okay? Now the hour just before dawn and the hour just after the sun sets are really gonna give you this nice, soft, pleasing light. You're gonna have some nice pastel colors in the sky and things like that. You're gonna have to bump up that ISO a little bit, but you're gonna get some really great light. Direction of light is really important to pay attention to also. You can have frontal lighting, side lighting, or backlighting. And it's all gonna be about creative choice for you and what you wanna go for. Also, spatial limitations and where you can get, but just pay attention to these things when you're out in the field, okay? The second reason why dawn and dusk are really great for wildlife photography is that's when the wildlife is actually the most active, okay? Most animal species are gonna be active at the very beginning of the day. You're gonna have a lot of birds out foraging for food. Near dusk is when everybody kind of comes back out and they start foraging again. During the middle of the day, things kind of quiet down and it's a little bit harder to find wildlife, okay? So take that with you next time you go out in the field and hopefully you'll be able to find some great animals, all right? So I'm gonna put 2 images up on the screen here. One on the left was taken during the early morning light when the sun was low and the light was really pleasing and kind of wrapping around the subject. The second one on the right was taken when the sun was high above, directly in the sky, during the midday. And notice how it's much more contrasty. The light is harsh, the shadows are harsh, and it's just not as pleasing to the eye as the one on the left is. You guys tell me what you think. Maybe you guys like the one on the right better. Again, photography is all about creative choices and what you like. So just pay attention to these things when you're out in the field, okay? Now we just talked about the sun and which direction it's coming from, but maybe it's cloudy out or overcast and you feel like, oh, well, the sun's not really out, so there's no light. Don't sit on your ass at home, get out and take photos anyway. In fact, overcast days will still have sunlight coming through the clouds. In fact, it's gonna give it this nice diffused, sort of very even looking tone to it, okay? It's gonna give you a little bit of a different vibe to your shots, but you can still get some great shots. You won't have any of the harsh contrast that you have when the sun is really out and beating down. In fact, you can probably tell the sun is quite a bit up in the sky at this point, and you can probably tell that this side of my face is very bright and this side is a little bit darker. And that's because the sun is, kind of getting up here. But if it were cloudy or overcast, I would just have this nice even light coming across my face and it would look a lot more pleasing than it probably does right now. Okay, so that's tip number 1, light. Let's move on to the next one. All right guys, so unfortunately right now, the tide is a little high for the shorebirds that I came out here right now, but I still want to show you guys some examples. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up on the screen, this first shot is a Say's Phoebe, and if you notice, the background behind it is it's sort of bright and it's sort of distracting from the subject. You don't really see the bird popping out of the frame, right? And when I took this, I didn't know if the bird was going to stay there or not, but I took a chance and basically I got down on my stomach. I basically lowered myself down to change the background behind the bird. So this second shot that you're seeing now is me just changing, and that was just 2 feet lower. And notice how the background is completely black and that bird just pops out of the frame like that. Isn't that beautiful? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Really look at what's behind your subject and make sure that it really helps your subject stand out, okay? That'll really help your photography next time you're out. So pay attention to backgrounds. That's tip number 2. Let's get on to tip number 3. All right, guys, tip number 3. Oh my God, I just missed that. Hopefully they'll come back. All right, guys, tip number 3, eye level. You wanna be at eye level with your subject. Now, the reason for this is, you've all heard the phrase that the eyes are the windows to the soul. And what this basically means is the eyes are where we make our strongest connections with our subjects, okay? Now, if possible, when you're photographing small animals like shorebirds, you wanna get down on your stomach like I am right now. What this does is it gets you at the eye level of the subject and it'll really grab the viewer's attention. It puts you in the world of that animal. You also wanna make sure that the eyes are in focus. That's kind of the main focus point of your photos when you're photographing wildlife, okay? Eyes, it's all about the eyes, all right? Hey, remember that time I talked about controlling your background? Well, getting down to eye level allows you to do that. Boom! That's called a callback. I know, I make it look easy. But seriously, when you get down to eye level with your subject, now you can control your background a lot more. And sometimes that's the best way to do it, all right? So if I photograph one of these shorebirds out here standing up, the sand is gonna be right behind them. It's gonna be very close to them from the angle that I'm shooting. So the sand will be in focus and it's not that pleasing of a background. What you wanna do is when you get down to eye level, the background is now much further away from them and it's much more out of focus and it's just a much more pleasing photograph. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So here is one photo that I took of this shorebird when I was standing up, and you can see that right behind it is just, it's not that pleasing. It doesn't make the subject pop. Now check out this photo of the same subject while I'm on my stomach laying down at its eye level and see how much better that looks. You got the nice ocean behind it. It's beautiful. It really makes that subject pop, right? Okay, so that was eye level, tip number 3. Let's get on to tip number 4. Okay guys, tip number 4, composition. Composition is essentially the way we place our subjects within the frame to give it a sense of balance. One of the rules that we use in photography to achieve this is called the rule of thirds. So when you're looking at your frame, imagine it's split into thirds. You have some lines coming down the sides here, some vertical lines from the top to bottom, and then from side to side that split the frame into thirds, okay? And essentially what you want to do is you want to typically place your subject, the focus of your subject, near the intersection of one of those lines. Our eyes are naturally drawn to these intersections because that's the way our brain sort of works when we look at photos, okay? That's important to keep into your mind when you're taking photos of animals. Some cameras even have the ability to turn on grids, to turn on lines in your viewfinder so that you could see it. I personally don't use it just because I've sort of already ingrained in my head how the rule of thirds works. Now there's even some tools in post-processing software like Adobe Lightroom that will help you frame up things by this rule of thirds, and even some other compositional framing elements and tools that you can use in the software that will help you really, make it a nice, pleasing frame. And I'll be going over those in a future video where I talk all about my post workflow. So make sure you click subscribe and the notification bell so that you're up to date when I release that one. Okay, so if you look, I have this sanderling in this shot right dead center, right? Now, I took a couple other shots where he's off to the side. Now, we don't just do this arbitrarily and just willy-nilly just pick whichever way we want. What you kind of want to do is, if your subject is heading in a certain direction, you kind of want to give them a sense of space. You want to give them room to move in the photo, okay? So if you're photographing a pelican in flight, you kind of want to give him space in front of him so that he has room to move and fly within the frame. Same thing with these little shorebirds here. You want to get down on their eye level and photograph them so that they have a little bit of breathing room within the frame, okay? It really helps make balance to your photo, and it makes it feel so that the animal's not restricted and it's able to move around and it's free. It's a wild animal, okay? So that's really important. So keep these compositional tips in mind next time you go out to photograph, and you'll get great shots. Let's move on to tip number 5. All right, guys, so tip number 5 might be one of the most important ones besides getting on eye level, and that's behavior. Make sure you study these animals when you're out, okay? So we might not always have the luxury of observing our animals before we go out to photograph them. You might be traveling to a different part of the world or the country than you've been before to photograph something specific, and you don't always have time to go out in the field and watch it and observe it every time. But that being said, the animals that you do go out and photograph regularly, make sure you sit and just watch them occasionally. You will learn so much just by getting out in the field and watching the animals and observing their behavior to understand when they're gonna do something specific to get a great shot. Let me explain to you what I mean here. Something just happened just now that was pretty amazing. So one of the behaviors that I understand about the way shorebirds work, especially in this particular area where I am, the tide was a little bit high on this beach, and there aren't a lot of shorebirds down on the actual shore. But behind me is a marsh. It's sort of an estuary here, and I know that when they're not down on the beach, they like to come up to the estuary and feed along the edges here. So knowing that, I came over to the marsh and was able to get all the shorebirds. They were all over here, they were all feeding around, and I got some great shots. Knowing where these birds want to be and knowing how they behave and what they do was something that helped me find them and get good shots of them. Then, while I was sitting there, something even more amazing happened. An osprey came and landed right at the edge of the marsh. Look at this guy. I mean, is that not just the most majestic thing you've ever seen? So he was just sitting there, sipping water, just waiting patiently for whatever it was. I had to sit and wait patiently. I was hoping he was going to go off and fly and get a fish that I would get a shot of. But what ended up happening was some other birds became alert and sort of started squawking and making lots of noise. And they all seem to understand that this indicates that there's something going on that they all need to pay attention to. And as soon as a flock of, it was some waterfowl and some shorebirds and some gulls took off, the osprey became alert and he took off and he started flying, and that's when I got this shot. Now, the reason I knew that this was gonna happen was birds will start to sort of move a little bit more aggressively and hasty. You can tell when they're sort of agitated and when they're about to fly. They sort of tense up and they start moving their heads a little bit quicker. And knowing that behavior allows you to understand that this bird is about to take flight. Get ready to press your shutter button, because that's what's going to happen. The wings are going to spread and they're going to start flying. Now, one of the tips that I have for you about getting a bird in flight in this particular moment, especially a bird like an osprey, which is a big bird, has a big wingspan. You don't want to be, if you have a zoom lens like I do, this is a 200 to 500 millimeter lens. So I didn't want to be all the way in at 500 millimeter filling the frame with the bird, because what'll happen is as soon as he takes flight and he spreads his wings and he starts moving, there's going to be parts of him out of the frame. See how my hand is out of the frame right here? Imagine if I was an osprey and I went to fly and all you get is this. So basically you want to kind of zoom out a little bit so that when he does take flight, the wingspan is a little bit smaller in the frame, and now you got the whole bird in there, okay? So I actually zoomed out quite a bit to get the whole thing in there. Some other behavior that I've learned over the years from certain animals that I take photographs of, like elephant seals. So elephant seals will oftentimes, the big males are very territorial, and when another male comes up on the beach and kind of gets in his space and gets near his ladies, they'll kind of perk up, they'll throw their head up, and they'll start grunting really loud. And as soon as they let out about 4 or 5 good grunts, they toss their head back and then they charge towards the other one. A lot of times the grunt might be enough to make the other guy back off because it's so intimidating, but that head toss and that grunt are things that I've learned to wait for and anticipate over time. So I'll get my frame set when I see one coming up on the beach, and I know that that big alpha male, if he catches him in his eye, he's gonna perk up, and he's gonna grunt, and he's gonna throw his head back, and that's when you take the shot, okay? So learning these behaviors will enable you to get some great shot of the behavior itself, okay? So waterfowl, for instance, spend a lot of time preening their feathers. When they're sitting out on the water, you'll notice that ducks like to sit there and they'll clean their feathers and make them all nice and neat and clean. It's really important for birds to do that occasionally. Now, waterfowl specifically have this one particular behavior that's really important to pay attention to. If you see a nice shot of a duck out on the water and it's preening its feathers, get down and you can get some nice shots of that. It can be a pretty photo, especially if the wings are sort of spread and you get some nice, eye shots, from peeking behind feathers. That's always cool. But if you wait and watch that bird preen its feathers and you frame up your shot, get ready, because as soon as ducks finish preening, they always do a good wing flap. They'll stretch their wings and they flap, and basically it gets all the feathers back into place, so when they tuck their wings back, everything's all nice and tidy. Okay, so waiting for that is something that I've learned over time. I've watched ducks enough to know that as soon as they're done preening, they're gonna do that wing flap and they're gonna stretch, and you're gonna get great shots of that, okay? Another behavior to look for with birds right before they fly, a lot of times they'll poop. So as I said before, it's important to know your poop. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. This guy's obsessed with poop. That's all he talks about in his videos. I promise that's not what this channel's about. It'll be the last time I talk about it. Just know that that's a good indication that something is about to happen. All right? So that was tip number 5. Pay attention to behavior. It's really important. Know your subjects, know what they do, know how they behave, and you'll get great shots of that behavior, I promise you. All right, guys, so before we wrap things up, I just wanted to thank you for stopping by. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me, really. One thing I want to highlight before I leave, though, I want you to take a look at this little bird here that I found today. This is a western snowy plover. Now, on this particular beach and a few beaches along Southern California, this little bird is endangered, okay? So one of the things that I always like to do when I go out and I see snowy plovers, I like to photograph them and make sure that I'm getting great shots, because part of my mission is to be a conservation photographer, okay? So I want to use these images to show you this little amazing bird that's losing its habitat as development and predation sort of diminishes this little bird's chances of surviving, okay? So Remain Wild is all about conservation. And I don't know if you knew this, but the way this works is Remain Wild will be contributing a portion of proceeds that I take in, and it'll go directly towards conservation efforts. I'll be teaming up with different conservation organizations that protect and enhance habitat for little birds like the snowy plover here. And I just ask for your support by just clicking that subscribe button down below, clicking the notification bell so that you know about all the upcoming videos, clicking like on the videos. Please help the channel grow. It really means a lot to me. It means a lot to these birds and all the animals out here. I would be eternally grateful for any support. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you guys were able to learn something from these 5 tips that I use when I go out into the field every time to get great shots. Hopefully you're able to use them and get great shots yourself. Hope you guys come by and check out more videos in the future. In the meantime, take care, stay safe, and remain wild.